Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Teresa Somerville, and I am with American Journal Experts, AJE. And today we are excited to be able to partner with AuthorAID to be able to offer this webinar on ethics and research publication. Our presenter is Kylie Peterson, Dr. Kylie Peterson. And as we get going, I just want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Peterson. For those of you who may not have had a chance to read her bio, but Dr. Peterson earned her PhD in molecular genetics from the University of Washington. She was a postdoctoral fellow and instructor at Harvard University before working in her current role as an academic editor and illustrator at Research Square. Dr. Peterson has 9 peer-reviewed studies in a variety of journals and has led several sessions on research ethics and avoiding plagiarism. She lives near Seattle and enjoys hiking, cooking, and pottery. So we are very excited to have her here to be able to speak to you all about ethics in research publication. And then also we have Andy from AuthorAID. And I was going to say, Andy, do you want to say a few points about AuthorAID and the mission of that organization?
Oh, yes. Hi, thank you very much. Yes, thank you everyone for joining. And yes, my name is Andy Nobes, and I am from INASP, and I manage the AuthorAID website. And we're really happy to have American Journal experts here running this webinar that covers some of the most important topics that we have seen that have come up so often in the conversations that we've had with early career researchers on our website forums and on our online courses. And always one of the most lively weeks on our research writing courses that we do is on ethical issues around authorship, plagiarism, predatory journals. These are areas that are quite often misunderstood. So this should be a really useful webinar, and I would ask everyone to listen carefully, take notes, and also I will mention something right at the end about the forum on our AuthorAID website where you can ask any other follow-up questions that aren't answered in the discussions we have here.
Awesome, thank you. So yes, what I was going to say, there are 2 things that I wanted to just call out real quick. As Andy noted, we will be able to have a discussion at the end. So there are 2 different places where you can add your questions. There's a Q&A feature, should be at the bottom middle of your screen, I believe. And then there's also a chat box on the right-hand side, and so you can put your questions there if needed. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we will have a certificate available for participation, and you will receive that information in a follow-up email for everyone who attended today. So I will let Dr. Peterson begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Ethics in Research Publication. Thanks for making time in your busy schedules to attend. I'm coming to you at 7 in the morning from beautiful Seattle, and I know your times are very different, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. This session is being recorded, and the slides will also be available afterwards. My name is Kylie Peterson. I'm an academic editor and illustrator at Research Square, as Teresa mentioned. So I'll be talking to you today about ethics in research publication, and let's just share my screen and start presenting. All right. So we'll be talking about 4 major topics today. We have plagiarism and self-plagiarism, predatory open access journals, authorship and ghost authorship, and ethics in author services. First, I want to say what plagiarism is. So plagiarism is the misrepresentation of someone else's original thought as your own. The U.S. Office of Research Integrity defines plagiarism as the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. Now, this covers a really broad range. It can include a phrase that expresses a thought particularly well in your field that's only been used by one other author before, a lab method that may be inspired by something another researcher suggested, or results that someone has published before. Avoiding plagiarism can be especially tricky when you're writing in a non-native language, but it is important to be cautious. Plagiarism is not considered ethical by any journal, so it can cause problems and delays in getting your work published. So in this section, we'll go through different kinds of plagiarism to ensure that you understand what to avoid. So there are several types of plagiarism that we'll discuss. Verbatim plagiarism, which means the exact words. Plagiarism of ideas. Loose paraphrasing, where the words are different but the ideas are the same. Plagiarizing alternative sources, and self-plagiarism. So here's an example of verbatim plagiarism and how to correct it. Verbatim plagiarism is copying text word for word from someone else's work. So if the original text reads, Salmonella typhimurium and Clostridium perfringens bacteria were present in over 75% of the chickens processed, then verbatim plagiarism would be if your paper then says, Salmonella typhimurium and Clostridium perfringens bacteria were present in over 75% of the chickens processed. The words are identical. So to correct this, we want to do a couple of different things. The proper citation will look like, other researchers found that, quotation mark, Salmonella typhimurium and Clostridium perfringens bacteria were present in over 75% of the chickens processed, quotation mark. And then a citation in some format comes next. So here it's Wu et al. 2015. This is from just one source. If content from several sources is duplicated, then this form of plagiarism is called mosaic or patchwork plagiarism. Using direct quotations like this is common in some fields and unusual in others. You can check with your colleagues if you don't yet know the literature very well. This type of plagiarism is common, but is very easily detected. Journals use software programs to compare manuscripts against published works, and plagiarized content will be rejected. Luckily, this type of plagiarism is also relatively simple to avoid. You make sure to credit the original with a citation, use quotation marks if the wording is the same. Also note on the proper citation, we have a signal phrase, other researchers found. That's going to alert your readers that this is not your original content and they should be looking for a citation to someone else's work. So plagiarism of ideas is when you mention someone else's unique idea, whether in the form of a theory, an interpretation, data, a method, an opinion, or new terminology without citing your source, even if you're explaining it in your own words. So the original text is the same as that on the last slide. Plagiarized idea in your paper might read, other researchers found that Salmonella typhimurium and Clostridium perfringens bacteria occurred in the majority of the processed chickens. Now we do have a signal phrase, but we don't have a citation. And we've changed the words slightly, but it's clearly the same idea, reflecting that this other author has found data about these chickens in their experiments. So to properly cite this paraphrase, again, we use that other researchers found signal phrase, and we also just make sure to put in the citation to the original paper where these data were published, Wu et al. 2015. So including references actually makes your paper stronger. Occasionally, beginning authors are reluctant to cite other authors because they feel that it dilutes their contribution. But in fact, readers and reviewers want to understand your work in the context of your field. Citing previous work shows them that you know what others have done and why your paper is important. I've frequently seen reviewers ask for particular studies to be mentioned and cited as part of the review process, especially in the introduction section. Citing others can also benefit your work and your career because many researchers track their own citations. It's possible to get alerts when someone cites your paper. So if they receive an email saying that your paper cites them, they're more likely to read your paper and then they could cite you later. Sorry, I'm having a little issue with the slides updating quickly. I'll try not to jump around too much. Our next topic is loose paraphrasing. Paraphrasing someone else's work with only slight changes, effectively maintaining the other author's logic while mentioning most or all of the same ideas, is loose paraphrasing. The flow of an argument is considered an original idea for plagiarism purposes. So the original text from the same paper, cross-contamination experiments showed that Clostridium perfringens and Salmonella species were easily transferred from raw chicken products to customers. And then a loose paraphrase says Clostridium perfringens and Salmonella species transferred easily from raw chicken products to consumers because of handling practices. Cross-contamination experiments demonstrated that these practices were the cause of the contamination. And so in this content, there should be a citation after both of these sentences because they express the idea of the original text. The resemblance is less obvious than our previous examples because the order of the words has changed. But you can see that the ideas are the same in the original and the paraphrased versions. The other researchers still deserve credit for their ideas and their results. In addition, not providing a citation suggests that your team performed the cross-contamination experiments that are being mentioned. The reviewers may start asking you for detailed methods as to how these experiments were performed. So it's best to ensure that they know this is published work rather than part of what they're evaluating. As far as plagiarizing alternative sources, this is failing to cite the source of publicly available knowledge that is not in the scholarly literature. As with journal articles, sources like books, web pages, blogs, lectures, and personal communications, which can include descriptions of unpublished ideas with permission of the person who originated them, should be referenced if they contribute unique information to your manuscript. So if your colleague has commented on your findings or suggested including a specific technique in your study, citing that personal communication from your colleague ensures that your colleague gets the credit they deserve. They will also be more inclined to cite you when you help them. So it overall supports a culture of collaboration and everyone receiving the credit that they're due. In addition, social media, web pages, and blog posts may be highly relevant to your research, even in my field of molecular biology. Just because this content is openly available to read and share doesn't mean that it should go uncredited. Some style guides may not contain formatting for these types of references, and you can ask the journal directly for their preferred format if needed. Proper citation of these alternative sources helps make your research more accessible and support a community of sharing, even with non-academics. And then, again, these authors may link back to you and cite you, which will help your work reach a wider audience in the end. Self-plagiarism is a little bit trickier topic. This is any use of content from your own previously published text, papers, or research results in a way that suggests it is new. When your manuscript contains uncited, recycled information, you're contradicting an unspoken assumption that people make when they're reading papers, which is that you're presenting entirely new discoveries. Unless otherwise noted, readers and reviewers will assume that everything in your paper has originated in that paper. So it's very important to tell them when that's not the case. It's best practice to cite your previous work thoroughly, even if you're just revisiting an old idea or a previously published observation. This may not seem to be plagiarism because the ideas belong to you, but it is important to avoid. And it's for similar reasons to those I mentioned earlier about the other plagiarism topics. Clarity for your reviewers about whether these data were generated in this study, a way to encourage your readers to investigate your previous work, and plus it provides an indication that you're established in your field, you've published before on this topic, and you're more likely to receive respect for this study. So although self-plagiarism doesn't cross the line into theft of other people's ideas, it can still create big issues in the scholarly publishing world. The standard publication process in many journals includes ceding copyright of the finished paper to the publisher. You're still the intellectual owner of the ideas and results, but that publication is property of the journal. So reuse of that material requires citation or permission. In addition to repeating sections of text verbatim from one of your papers to another, self-plagiarism can also refer to the publication of identical papers in two different journals or places. That one's known as duplicate plagiarism. Many journals now have declarations as part of submission that the submitted work has not been published or submitted elsewhere. And this can be a little bit frustrating because you're waiting around for this journal to review and approve your paper. But it's important not to go against that declaration that you're making. Either of these types of plagiarism can make it really difficult to publish again with that journal or any related journal, so it's very important to avoid. You should also be careful about specific experiments, ideas, or methods. Don't present these things as new content in multiple manuscripts, even if they're being published at similar times. You can cite unpublished or in-press works if necessary. So now we'll move to talking about predatory open access journals. I'm going to take a second because I have a cold to drink a little water, just so my throat doesn't die. And I'll be addressing all of your questions at the end. So open access journals are excellent in many ways. They provide a lot of benefits for both authors and readers. And you may notice this word benefits is underlined. That's because there's a link in this document that you'll be receiving to our Author Research Center. So you can do a little more background reading on open access journals if you don't know a lot about them already. Many of these journals operate for positive reasons. Open access is beneficial because researchers outside large institutions or those with little funding are better able to access your paper. However, some journals simply try to make money without any scholarship involved. The fact that open access often requires payment from authors to support making their papers available presents a chance for unscrupulous people to make money by not actually providing the proper services and simply charging the money. This can range from little or no authentic peer review to publishing falsified data because of the lack of peer review, to unfortunately sometimes never publishing your manuscript at all. In this section, we'll discuss the problems with predatory journals and how to identify them. So the costs of predatory journals go beyond the obvious. They take your money and often don't provide the services they're promising, but they can also remove the ability to publish elsewhere. Your work may be tied up in a copyright agreement, and this journal may be delayed or never publish. They misinform readers and undermine public trust. If a journal has inadequate peer review, it may publish incorrect findings. And even if your work is sound, it can make your paper look untrustworthy by association. So how can you identify a predatory journal before submitting a paper to it? We've compiled 9 warning signs. And 1 or 2 of these signs may be no problem. They may indicate that the journal is new, but there's no unethical aspect to it. But if you see many of these warning signs, or even a couple, it's a good sign that you should look more deeply into this journal and whether it's actually doing what it says it's doing. First is a submission fee. If a journal asks for a submission fee or handling fee instead of a publication, it's possible that this is a warning sign. Submission fees are charged before your paper is published, and some legitimate journals do require submission fees, but it goes on your list of signs that this may be a journal of concern. Publication fees are charged upon publication. Those are very common for open access, so if you're publishing open access, this is not a warning sign. Copyright. If the open access journal retains the copyright rather than issuing a Creative Commons license, this may be a cause of concern as well. A Creative Commons license allows free distribution of your work, so that's one of the ways that open access journals distribute your work and allow it to reach a wider readership. If they're retaining the copyright instead, that may be a problem. You can also evaluate the board of editors. If the board of editors does not include names in your field that you recognize or who you can find easily online, there may be an issue. In particular, some journals will actually not list any names of editors, no editors-in-chief, no board of editors, or they may say coming soon. And again, this can be a sign of a journal that's nearly new, but it is a possible warning sign of predatory journal as well. In some cases, there will be a publisher website which lists many journals, 10 to 50 journals, which they're going to launch. It's a huge event, it's very exciting, and they want your content. It sounds great up front, but this publisher may not have the resources to support all of these journals. Where are they getting the papers? Do they actually have sites set up for all of these journals? This is something to evaluate as well. Delayed launch is another significant issue. If late or skipped issues of the journal can be seen, if the publisher promises that a journal will be available at a certain time, but the issue doesn't appear, this is a sign that the launch of the issue containing your paper may well be delayed also, or never appear. They may also have relatively unprofessional looking websites. So normally a journal website is very concerned with presentation. They want to make your papers look as good as possible so that they look as good as possible. A less professional site will have poor language use. This can be hard to evaluate if you're not a native speaker. You can ask around among your colleagues if you're in doubt and hopefully come to a good conclusion. They may have no contact information for editors or customer service. And they may have more unrelated advertising than you would expect. So a journal website, I would expect to see ads for publishers, author services, or things related to my field, like instruments that I would use in my experiments. More general advertising would be something like rental cars or unrelated websites or prescription drugs in a non-medical journal. Things that are more geared toward the broader public rather than journal authors can indicate that this site is not a specialty journal site. Seventh, we have false affiliation. In some cases, the journal title may say something like American Journal of Ice Cube Studies. And it's actually listing board of editors who are people you've never heard of in the ice cube field, who are located in Russia. This doesn't seem very American, and this is one of the pieces of evidence that you can use to determine whether the journal has a false-seeming affiliation. Title and abstract errors, again, this goes with the professionality of the site. So typographical errors in papers do slip by, but if there are multiple errors, incorrect usage for your field, and phrasing problems in the title and abstract of the papers you can see on the website, then it's unlikely that the journal is spending a lot of resources on making your papers look professional. They won't make your work look good either if you publish there. Finally, we have incorrect content. The title of the journal and its scope should match the articles that appear inside the journal. All of the articles should be related to each other in the stated field. I don't want to publish my molecular genetics article next to an article on musicology and an article on history. All of those could be valid scholarly articles, but the readership of the journal is likely to be confused, and people are less likely to find your work if it appears in a context like that. So I've added some journal reputation resources. So places that you can go to determine whether a journal is a good journal include the Committee on Publication Ethics member list. So this is an association which journals and editors join. They can be audited by this committee, and it determines whether they're treating authors ethically. Another good thing to check is the journal rankings. I've linked impact factor here. So there are listings on the journal website very often of their impact factor or other impact measurements. And if you check that against the impact factor sites and find that they've given you a number that's not correct, that's another good sign that they're not an honest journal. Journals may also claim to be indexed. So indexing allows more people to find your work. And you can check the index websites directly to determine whether they are actually indexed. And that will also help you evaluate this journal. So now let's move on to authorship. Authorship is having one's name listed as an author on a published paper due to one's contributions. This may be problematic if the contributions are not significant, or if researchers with significant contributions are omitted. So there are some professional guidelines in different fields for what constitutes suitable authorship. You can read up on those and talk to your colleagues to determine what's usual for your field. But in short, The ethical approach to authorship is to include as authors only people who contributed significantly to the work and all of the people who did so. In this section, we'll discuss these matters in detail to make sure that we understand them. Some journals require a public guarantor for each article, or an author who takes responsibility for the entire research project. That includes conception, data acquisition and analysis, and publication. And this person is usually the corresponding author. Author names may be listed either alphabetically in a few cases or by magnitude of contribution, and this depends on the field and the journal. Reading a journal's submission guidelines and consulting your colleagues are good ways to learn more about the conventions related to authorship in your field. In some fields, students are expected to publish alone, while in others, 6 to 12 authors appear on every paper, and some have more. Although these conventions differ, both can be ethical. However, there are some unethical forms of authorship. We'll start with honorary authorship. So in gift authorship, the study is gifted to someone who did not contribute. This is often done as respect, for instance, to honor a major contributor to the field, but it's not accurate if this person was not involved in the study, and this acknowledgement should be listed in the acknowledgement section to honor that person instead. You can also cite their work, as we discussed before. Guest authorship is often when a prominent researcher is added to the list to use the credibility of their name, even if they did not contribute to the study. Again, this is inaccurate, and that researcher might not appreciate it. Coercive authorship is a bad situation that unfortunately I've heard of a few people being in before. When someone in authority over the author, such as a department head or advisor, requests that another person be added as an author, even though they didn't contribute to the study, that is a coercive authorship. It may be very hard to push back against this. However, journals often find out about this sort of issue. So you can let that person know that you don't feel comfortable adding this author, and you have concerns about the paper being published due to the unethical nature of the request. If a journal finds out, they will not publish your paper. Many journals also have authorship declarations in which each author's work is recognized and all state consent to being listed on the publication. And this is because honorary authorships like these can cause problems. So, for example, they can mask industry ties to a paper. A study may be funded by a corporation, which causes it to be biased, but no disclosure is given because honorary academic authors have been included to give the study legitimacy. Adding additional authors can also elevate the study beyond its potential impact. This is a guest author case. You may be using someone else's good name to make people more excited about your work, although your work is less significant than might be warranted. On the other hand, if your study is very significant and exciting, it may be attributed to that other person rather than to you, and you should be getting the credit for that. Attributing without permission is also an inherent ethical problem. If someone is an author, then they need to consent to being an author. Overall, even though honorary authorship may be intended positively, it misrepresents the nature of the study, and it can be used in bad faith. So it's better to cite and acknowledge the people you want to honor instead. Ghost authorship is the opposite of honorary authorship. So this is when a significant contribution was made to a manuscript, but the person who made that contribution is not being acknowledged. Ghost authorship includes any content that was contributed to the study and is not acknowledged. This can be manuscript drafting, data collection and analysis, taking a microscope image for the paper, anything that contributes substantially to the paper's content, and the author has not been acknowledged. Now, this is not the same as language editing or formatting assistance. Those don't change the content of the paper, and so they're not considered author quality contributions. And this is a slightly old citation, but we do have a paper that was published saying that ghost authorship was present in approximately 1/10 of papers published in 6 medical journals in 2008. So this is relatively common, and unfortunately it also causes problems. Again, we can have masked industry ties to papers with ghost authorship. The authors who are doing the work but getting no credit may have bias. So beyond putting a veil of academic respectability over their paper by adding an author, they may simply not list the authors who truly had the bias, which obscures it even further. Ghost authorship can disguise a lack of expertise or an inability to properly oversee data acquisition or analysis. Those are things that are very important to do for your research yourself so that you can be responsible for the content of your paper. And it can also disadvantage junior researchers or those outside academia, who are the most commonly left off of authorships. So in order to avoid unethical authorship, authors should disclose all contributors and their specific individual contributions and affiliations. Authors should sign a formal declaration about their contributions. And authors should publish a comprehensive list of contributions and a detailed acknowledgments section. So this is similar to citation in that your colleagues are being credited for their work. And that's the most ethical way to go about everything. Make very sure that everyone is credited for the work that they actually did. Cite and acknowledge those who you want to honor in addition. And your paper should be solid and will move forward for publication at the journal. Now, we just discussed ghost authorship, but I'm here from an author services company. So what do I do and why is it considered ethical? So the number of author services companies are increasing, and it can be hard to figure out what help is appropriate and how to identify unethical behavior by these services. Language editing should entail clarifying the language without adding or subtracting information. So it can definitely be difficult to write in a language that's not your native language, and we're happy to help with that kind of thing, but we can't tell you what you mean. So I'll often put comments into the papers that I'm editing, asking the authors to clarify and suggesting phrasing that they could use if they mean what I think they mean. But I would not rewrite that sentence for them because then it wouldn't be their work anymore. Formatting a manuscript should consist of changing layout elements and references to conform to a journal's specifications, but not adding content again. So if someone finds a citation that's empty and they happen to know the paper, they should still not add that citation. They should suggest that to you, and you decide whether to add that because it's your content. Reviewing services should assess a manuscript's content, statistics, and novelty, and again, not directly rewrite the manuscript. Basically, an ethical service will assist authors to polish their work for publication, but it will still be fundamentally the work of the authors, your ideas, your data, and your logic. So appropriate author services will have clear ethical limits on what they will and will not provide. They will deny a client's request that crosses an ethical boundary. They will not help a client plagiarize or commit other ethical violations. Specifically, author services should never offer to provide content. They will not help fabricate or manipulate results or figures. They will not sell a client guest authorship. They will improve a manuscript's form without changing the manuscript's content. And they may be accredited by an outside agency or be a member of a society such as COPE. Your institution or funding agency may also have an approved list of author services or occasionally a list of forbidden author services, which they've found to not be ethically sound. So to sum up, what you want to evaluate when you're looking for an author service is their quality, their reputation, the service level agreement. So this is the type of services they provide. And again, if you see content alteration here, that is a good sign that you should shy away from this author service. And their academic and publishing ethics. If you use an author service that is not considered ethical, then you may have trouble getting your paper published. Journal editors often know these companies, and they'll be wary of your paper if you've used them. So asking colleagues, reading online reviews, looking at the website of the author service itself, and asking them direct questions if needed can all help you assess the quality of this service. And in some cases, services may be available through or recommended by your journal publisher. If you've already gone through the process of deciding whether your journal is a reputable one, then a recommendation from them should be trustworthy. That's all we have for the main part of the presentation today. We'll have a discussion afterwards. Thank you all for attending Ethics in Research Publication. So Teresa and Andy are both here. We're happy to answer your questions. And you'll also receive a copy of the presentation with additional resource links. So I believe Teresa is going to facilitate our Q&A section. I'll stop sharing so you can see us again.
Great.
And please go ahead and ask your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kylie. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing your experience and being thorough in that. So we do have several questions that people have dropped in. So thank you for that. And feel free to continue to add as we go through this. The first question is, how do you find predatory journals? So that may be how to avoid them, how to find and how to avoid.
Yeah, so there are actually some lists out there on the web of predatory journals that are kept by various different people, and you may or may not want to trust those lists. So in most cases, they're put together by a small organization. Some of them do have an appeals process where you can decide. If you are someone at that journal, you can say, oh, I'm not a predatory journal, and send in an appeal saying, okay, here's what's going on with this journal. And they may be able to remove that. But many of these blacklists are not as trustworthy. So the approach that I would personally choose is to go for a whitelist, like the COPE list, of journals that are reputable and have been confirmed to treat their authors ethically.
Great, thank you. Someone else, Andy, did you have something to add? Great.
I can't hear you, Andy.
There should be in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen a mute button and an unmute. You're not saying that. Okay, hang on one second. Let me try.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I thought that the list of recommendations that Dr. Peterson had in her slides were very good for how to identify predatory journals. There are a couple of other things that we have noticed over the last couple of years, and I would add to those. Always be critical of email invitations that you receive in your inbox, unless you're aware of the sender. So if you receive an email from a journal or a journal editor saying, come and submit your paper to our journal, only take that seriously if that's a service, a publisher or a journal that you've actually registered with. Be skeptical of those claims in that email, because that's where most of these kind of questions come from. They come from an email that the researcher has received, that they feel quite flattered that the journal has reached out to them, but you need to be very careful. I think it was mentioned in the slides about journals that have a very wide scope, and I think generally speaking, these predatory journals try to reach as many people as possible, and so the scope of the journal will be extremely wide. Now, there are, of course, very famous journals such as Nature and Science that naturally do have a huge scope and are multidisciplinary, but you can usually, by looking at the editorial board of those journals, see that they have a significant editorial board that can cover lots of different subject areas. But generally speaking, be skeptical of journals called things like the International Journal of Advanced Research that have big claims. Also, in the slide, it was mentioned about checking the indexing of those journals. And if you follow the links that will be on the slides that you're sent, you can actually search for those journals within indexes such as Clarivate, Web of Science, and Scopus, and check and see if those journals are in those indexes. And a lot of predatory journals will say, we've got a high impact factor, this is our impact factor. Always check on the Clarivate Web of Science to see if that journal is actually indexed in the Web of Science. Otherwise, that claim about impact factors is not true. And finally, the directory of open access journals can also be a good place to look to find credible open access journals.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for chiming in, Andy. And actually, right along with that, and you address this, I think, Simon, in your question, but I think it's worth, or in your answer, I think it's worth calling out again. Someone has asked, what if the journal is handling many specialties such as medical papers, environment, agriculture? Just an example. Should one get worried, especially in this era of multidisciplinary?
I think that it depends on the journal's quality and scope. As Andy was saying, nature and science have extremely broad scopes as well, and those are excellent journals. It also depends on whether there's a credible thread tying all of those together. So if they all focus on a particular aspect of that field, then that could be a very reasonable scope and the readership could be extremely interested in it. So unfortunately, it's a little bit case by case. I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, but if you look through the articles and discuss it with your colleagues, you should be able to determine whether you think it's credible that one reader would like to read all of these articles in the journal.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kylie. Someone else has asked, should you call out the predatory journal and retrieve your work? I guess this is if they have submitted their work. And I was going to say, I can speak to this if I need. I've read a little bit, but I would love to have you guys talk to this first as well.
I've honestly had a really privileged experience. My labs have mostly worked with good journals and had connections there. So while I know that predatory journals are to be avoided, I haven't personally needed to withdraw a paper from one. Maybe you and Andy would know more?
I know that there is a case written about this on the website of COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, which I think mentions this, which Teresa's nodding along, so she may know more about this. Generally speaking, when people have asked me this before, I usually ask them, have they actually signed copyright or assigned the permission to publish to the journal? Because if they haven't, then they have a good chance of being able to retrieve and ask for that and publish elsewhere, basically. So it can be important to know if you've actually signed away your copyright or not.
Yeah, I would echo that, and that's actually the case that I was gonna speak about is that in particular. And I think the other piece of advice or suggestion that they had was, you know, if this by chance has happened to you, then when you reach out to a future journal that you do want to publish this with, that you want to publish your manuscript with, let them know, right? Like let them know and just be able to be proactive in that communication. If, you know, for some reason you have signed that copyright. Now, if you haven't, then you have more to stand on in being able to not have that published. But if for some reason you have and you do want to still pursue publishing with a good journal, then just be very forthcoming with that information because it never hurts to try. So, okay, perfect, good. Okay, great. So this question is actually more specifically about authorship. And so someone says, concerning ghost authorship, you said to avoid it by measures of writing formal declaration for contributors. So their question is there a standard form of declaration and specific authority to protect contributor rights?
Okay. There's a form that I've seen frequently. I'm not sure if that's dictated by any particular authority, but I know what's common among journals. So most often in journal listings, I'll see something on the format of author name or initials, collected the data, or next author harvested the samples. This person performed data analysis. All authors assisted with drafting the manuscript, and all authors have approved the content for publication. So just really a name and a very short description of what the person contributed to the study. It's fine to list multiple people if multiple people acquired your samples. And as long as you just say, in short, what the person did, then it's easy for the reviewers and editors to assess whether the authorship is appropriate for them. And if you find someone, maybe an undergraduate in your lab or someone who helped you in a field study, who you're uncertain if they would be an author, it's okay to check with the journal and see what their standard for authorship would be.
Great, great, thank you, Kylie. Someone else asks, can you talk more on citing the alternative source of original ideas to prevent plagiarism, such as from colleagues or unpublished work? Do you have suggestions or recommendations regarding that?
Well, so what I've done in the past is if we're planning to publish a paper on a particular matter in the future, but we maybe want to discuss it in a paper that we're submitting now, we would say our unpublished data in parentheses, and that would be how we would cite it. Also, if a paper is already being submitted or in press, your journal may have specific guidelines on this, but often you would say, in a similar format to what you use for your other citations, you know, author et al. In press or in submission. And a lot of journals will say in their submission guidelines, you know, only say in press if it has been accepted. So that is something to check, make sure that you're using the right format, but you should definitely cite your other work. Again, this is a matter of making it clear for the reviewers as well as being ethical, because the reviewers are going to be very interested in that sentence. They're always interested in the sentence that you don't want them to focus on. So they're going to say, oh, well, tell us more about this. You know, why aren't you being more detailed about that? And then you have to come back to them and respond, and then you have to cite it anyway. So just cite it up front so everyone knows what's going on. We're planning to publish this later. Or this was a personal communication from someone in another lab who's working on something similar and they're planning to publish it later.
Great, great, awesome. Thank you. So actually kind of in line with that as well, someone says, if I read a paper related to my research and then get an idea that I want to add in my paper and paraphrase that idea and cite it, is that considered as plagiarism?
I think that would be ethical because you're citing it. You're acknowledging the other person's contribution to your paper. So that's perfect. I would do exactly that.
Great. Great. So this is also an authorship question. This person says, how do you decide the authorship to be the first author? So how do you choose the first author if everyone has equal contribution in the paper?
So this is something that can be different in different fields. I would check with your colleagues too. But in my field of molecular biology, I have published a paper where I had an equal contribution to another first author. And what we did at that time was we put a little asterisk next to each of our names and just included a footnote saying these authors contributed equally to this paper. So you can do that kind of thing at all the journals that I'm aware of. I haven't heard of anyone having trouble with that kind of an arrangement. You can always check with the journal editor in advance if you want to make certain, though.
Great, great, thank you. Let me see as I'm looking through. Go ahead, Andy.
Can I ask Kylie a question? Dr. Peterson a question.
Yeah.
We get a lot of questions asked very, very commonly on our online courses, and that is, can I write a paper from a presentation that I've done at a conference? Is that a form of self-plagiarism, or what do I need to do?
That's a really interesting question. So I've never had any problems with that, and we have discussed this with journal editors before. Usually the consensus seems to be that a poster or a talk given at a conference can later be published in a print journal. It's possible that there would be a problem with that in a journal, but I haven't heard of that before. And in fact, a lot of fields are going to having online preprint servers where the text of the paper can even be available before official journal publication. I would not do that unless you are very certain it's allowed, but that can actually be okay in certain fields, and your colleagues would know about it if so. But yeah, I've definitely published papers that include data from presentations I've given, so that should be perfectly all right.
Great, that's great. So there's another question that says, is there any body or authority to take actions against predatory journals, particularly when so many predatory journals have been identified?
And I don't know if there is or not. Ideally, there would be. I think that a lot of them use different tactics so that it can be hard to apply one law to all of them, but maybe your Andy would know more about that one.
No, I think this is something that's very difficult to take any action against because a lot of these journals are in different countries. I think there's been one high-profile case in the United States of one of the best-known predatory publishers, who I probably shouldn't name, but if you look up, if you go onto Google and search for I've forgotten the name of the publisher actually, but there has been some legal action taken against one very specific publisher, but it's unlikely that this is scalable and it will happen against all predatory publishers because there are hundreds and hundreds of them. So there's unlikely to be any action taken in the near future, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so another question that we have is, if students have done lab work, but they did not write the manuscript, the supervisor wrote the manuscript, who will be the first author?
So if the student performed all of the lab work, but did not write the manuscript, then in my field, the student would be the first author, even if they did not do the writing. But again, this may vary by your field. I've talked to other people who are grad students in other disciplines, and for them it can be very different how authorship is usually determined. So again, I have to throw you back to talking to your colleagues because they're the ones who know your field the best. There's not a rule across all different fields for this.
Okay. Let's see. And then someone else said, would you be able to clarify when you talk of authorship, do you mean those names that will appear when you cite the paper, including those who contributed but do not have to appear for citation? So maybe just being able to clarify authorship in general as well.
Okay, so for authorship, generally what we mean when we say authorship is you open a paper and you see the title at the top, and then there's a list of names. And those names should be everyone who contributed to the paper. When you cite the paper, like in our example in the slides, the Wu et al. 2015, Wu is one of the authors, they're the first author, but there may be other authors there in any number. So we have Wu et al. Et al. Is short for et aliates and associates. So Wu and everyone else who worked on the paper are actually being cited there, even though their names are not literally listed in that citation format. So everyone who contributed to the paper in a material way, by providing data, by drafting the manuscript, any of this, should be listed in the full author list. And then the citation format depends on how the journal wants you to list it. Basically, the idea behind the citation format is only that you're able to find the paper, and then you would be able to read the full author list when you find the paper. I'm sorry, I have a cat in the background. Hopefully you guys can't hear.
Great, great. So I have one more question that I'm going to read, and then Andy, I will let you jump in as well as if you want. This person says, if I get an idea from the introduction of a paper, maybe it's for the introduction of a paper, but it says, if I get an idea from the introduction of the paper and that idea is not from the paper I am reading, who should I cite for that idea? The origin of the paper that they're reading? Is that question clear?
I'm not sure that's clear. Let me see if I can read it in
Okay.
the Q&A window. I often do a little bit better job when I can look at it. So you're looking at
The second to the last question at the bottom. Third to last. So it's
yeah, no, it looks different for me, sorry. Okay, I can't find it. So if you're reading another paper and you're reading the introduction and you get an idea, but it's not an idea that's specifically spelled out in that paper, is I think what we're talking about.
okay.
It rarely hurts anything to cite the other author, whatever most directly inspired your idea. But in some cases, it may not make sense to do that. And it may be an understanding of the field that arises in you overall as a result of reading this other paper. So it's definitely a good idea to do a literature review and make sure if anyone has already published an idea similar to your idea. And then that would make it very clear what you should cite when you want to pursue that idea. But the essence of research is coming up with novel ideas, and sometimes there's not going to be anything you can cite except for your own brilliant mind. So do try to do your due diligence and make sure that you're not stepping on anyone else's metaphorical toes by taking credit for an idea that they've already had. But sometimes it's your idea and there's no one you can cite.
Great, thank you, Kylie. And Andy, I wanted to be able to hand it over to you to add questions or thoughts or any other information that you wanted to provide as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's been a really interesting webinar, and we've covered some really interesting and complicated topics. And I guess we haven't really had time to cover all the questions that we've had. And so what I'd like to invite all the participants of this broadcast to do, I'm just going to quickly share my screen, hopefully now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'd like to invite all the participants to do is to ask any other follow-up questions you have on the AuthorAID website. My slides are also going very slowly. So if you aren't already aware of AuthorAID, and I think a lot of the participants here are, it's a website with news, free resources, online courses, an online mentoring system, and a group of forums where we have discussions on lots of different topics around research writing and publishing. And I think my screen's frozen, so I'm not sure what's happening on the screen now. But we have on our website, which is www.authораid.info. You can see the various content on our website with online mentoring and resources. But if you go to our online forums, which is forums.authораid.info, we can hopefully continue this discussion with any follow-up questions you have on the specifics of some of these questions around plagiarism and predatory journals and authorship, and anything else that questions you might have, where we can perhaps suggest you hyperlinks and other resources that you can go to. Okay, I've stopped sharing my screen now. I'm not sure if you could actually see what I was sharing, but thank you very much for joining, and I'll hand back over to Teresa now.
Yes, great. Okay, and Andy, you said that was forums.authораid.info. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So I've dropped that actually in the chat as well, in case people would like to see it spelled out and be able to copy it. So yes, thank you so much. As Andy said, please go over there and add your questions. And thank you so much for all of your questions here today and for joining us. As we said earlier, we're across many different time zones, and so whatever time it is where you're at, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Kylie and Andy, thank you both so much for making this a great presentation and experience, and hopefully something really useful for our audience. So thank you again. Kylie, I don't know if you have anything that you would like to add, and then we can wrap it up.
I just want to say thank you again to Teresa and Andy and all the participants. I was taking notes when we went through your questions, and you're helping us to make this presentation better in the future. So I really appreciate that.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.